Let me talk this morning about something that I hope not to be an oxymoron, and that's the subject of doing business in the state of Connecticut. I promise that I won't just stand here and whine all morning, but rather attempt to suggest some things that we can do to try to foster growth and prosperity for not only us, but more importantly for the state of Connecticut. And let me start by saying that Connecticut generally has been a very good place for Pratt Whitney for 85 years now. Really since we first set up shop here on Capitol Avenue in Hartford in 1925, and then shortly after that moved across the river to East Hartford to some roomier headquarters there. And it's been, and it remains a good place to do the right kinds of businesses in offices, labs, and our factories, because generations of Pratt people have faced tough challenges and transformed the company to meet those challenges. So let me give you some examples. While we were wildly successful prior to World War II and during the war and a little bit after with manufacturing, developing and manufacturing the iconic Wasp engine, the radial engine, at the end of World War II, Pratt had never built a jet engine. It was a massive effort by our people, took major investments, but by the early 1950s, we were the world leader in jet engine technology. During the same period, we built a space business from scratch. Some of you may recall the great engine war that we had with General Electric in the 80s, competing on engines for the F-16, and we moved on from that challenge to develop the engines for the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35 that you saw in there, and also the F-22. And those are the only, what's referred to as the only fifth-generation military engines in the world, indisputably the most advanced military engines that are in production today. And over the years, we've transformed Pratt from a Connecticut-based company that just made and sold engines and spare parts to truly a global business with a worldwide R&D, manufacturing, and aftermarket service network driven by the demands of the international airline industry. Now, very recently, there were those who thought that Pratt was kind of out of the large commercial engine business when we weren't on the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A380 that were launched in the early part of the decade. But to quote a former famous resident of Hartford, the reports of our death were highly exaggerated. It turned out to be a very short-sighted perspective for those who thought that. We were really focused on the long term. And our engineers were working on a whole new engine concept. We spent about $1 billion in R&D to make this concept a reality. And by the way, that's kind of just the starters. That $1 billion was kind of technology development and risk reduction money that we spent to get us to this point. Now we're actually spending more hundreds of millions of dollars to develop the engines for the applications that I'll talk more about today. So those are big numbers. As you can see, the engine business is not for the faint of heart. But the fruit of our big investments has been the new Pure Power family of engines, the geared turbofan engines. They're game changers that provide double-digit improvements in fuel efficiency, noise, emissions, and provide huge maintenance cost benefits for our customers. So far, Pratt engines from Pratt, the Pure Power engines, the new geared turbofan from Pratt, have won new positions in Japan, on airplanes being developed in Japan, in Canada, and in Russia. And then most recently, you all read the papers last year, I'm sure in December, and you saw the big announcements about Airbus finally deciding to launch a re-engined version of their A320 family of engines and selected a Pratt Whitney geared turbofan engine for their new re-engined aircraft. That's the first time in 13 years that either Airbus or Boeing have selected a brand new Pratt engine. So we're back. This is a very interesting segment. The single aisle segment of aircraft, that's kind of the 737, A320 family, is kind of the most lucrative segment with the aerospace market, and the new family of engines has put us right back into the market big time, and we got a chance to kind of take back share again. Now, I mentioned these things as examples, not to gloat about Pratt Whitney, but really as examples of what a healthy company does to grow and reinvents itself or transforms itself in the face of different challenges. And I'm sure that many of the companies here, represented here this morning, have faced similar challenges of similar magnitudes and have had to do the same thing. But Connecticut needs to recognize that it too needs to compete for jobs, not just against other states in the US, but internationally as well. It needs to transform itself, just as all of us have had to recognize the changing world and transform ourselves with a focus on competitiveness, innovation, and the next generation technology. Certainly most of you, I think, understand this. There's been a huge shift in the global economy with profound implications for the state of Connecticut. Some of you recall our former chairman, UTC Chairman George David, who spoke to CBIA in 1997. He talked about some of these trends. Companies around the world were using process re-engineering to get leaner and more efficient by an order of magnitude. This was vital because, as in many of your businesses, we find it difficult, if not impossible, to get price increases in our business. This is certainly the case for the airline and the aerospace industry, notwithstanding what some of you may have spent to go visit family and friends over the holiday. Believe it or not, airplane ticket prices are really a bargain when you consider that a round-trip ticket in 1960 from New York to London in today's dollars is about $5,400. Today you can buy 9 airplane tickets, what it cost back then to fly from New York to London. So there's just been huge pricing pressure in the industry. Since the airlines were deregulated in 1978, ticket prices have fallen by about 45% in real terms. In yields, and yield is a measure of how much revenue per passenger seat an airline gets. For U.S. airlines, it's fallen steadily right alongside that. The pricing pressure flows right down from the end customer, the passenger, you, to the airlines, to the people that make aircraft engines and airplanes. Mr. David spoke about globalization narrowing the gap between traditional economic powers and the rest of the world, and both Mr. David back in 1997 and our current chairman, Mr. Louis Chinevere, today recognize the fact that to succeed in Connecticut, businesses must concentrate on high-value, high-knowledge work with a major technology component, and we had to recognize that low-value, low-knowledge work had to leave high-cost places and, quite honestly, probably never come back again. In the past 13 years since Mr. David spoke, I think these trends have only accelerated, particularly because people that in places where we used to call developing countries have been getting highly educated and more highly skilled at a faster rate than I think we even imagined 13 years ago. Economic growth and wealth creation are accelerating in places like China, India, and Brazil. In 2009, the gross domestic product in North America, Europe, and Japan were all down somewhere between 3% and 5% in 2009. However, even in the face of the worst economic crisis probably that we've seen since World War II, that the world had seen since World War II, GDP grew in India by 7% and 9% in China. And when the final figures are in for 2010, we think GDP in North America will be up a little bit, probably a little bit under 3%, as compared to 10% GDP growth in China and 8% in India. Just startling numbers. These countries are increasingly important customers. Even with Pratt's large military engine business, well over half of our sales come from international customers. And for all UTC, that number is about 60%. 60% of UTC sales come from international customers. And we found highly skilled people in countries like India, China, Poland, Taiwan, and Singapore to give us high-quality, low-cost material sources to keep us competitive and give us access to those international markets. These global economic changes, including emerging market customer demand, have led us to have to transform Pratt Whitney from basically a Connecticut-based company, a Connecticut-based supplier, to a global company with a continued strong Connecticut presence, but with operations all over the world. Pratt sales have grown from $7.4 billion in 1997 to, as Joe mentioned, about $13 billion in revenues today, and at the same time our earnings went from about $800 million to about $2 billion in earnings today. That's an average annual growth rate of about 4.25% per year on revenue and close to 8% a year on earnings over the past 13 years on average, in part driven by the rapid growth that I talked about in the emerging markets. And both our manufacturing footprint and our workforce have shifted to kind of mirror the growth and the globalization. In 1990, 69% of Pratt's workforce was Connecticut-based. About 7 out of 10 people that work for Pratt right here in Connecticut. Today that number is only 30%, and it's that way in response to the competitive global marketplace. Similarly, today about 15% of our manufacturing costs for our Connecticut-based large commercial and our military engine businesses is outside the U.S. versus hardly anything back in 1990. Now, Pratt is certainly not the only aerospace company to have to make these kinds of moves or shift, transform its operations, and reassess where it does business. Boeing had to move its headquarters from Washington State to Chicago, and they're now setting up an assembly line to assemble Boeing 787s in South Carolina. This will be the first time that they've assembled an airplane anywhere out of Washington State. Airbus, you know, France, about as socialist as a country as you can find, with obviously a big emphasis on protecting jobs. Even Airbus is now assembling A320s in China because they have to try to take advantage of the marketplace there. And if they are able to win the Air Force tanker program, they'll assemble those airplanes in Alabama. And both Boeing and Airbus are kind of looking over their shoulders right now at competitors coming from China, Russia, Japan, Canada, and Brazil. Another example, our major competitor that Joe talked about, GE headquarters, which is headquartered here in Connecticut, obviously, operates a huge engine business complex in Ohio that looks remarkably like our kind of East Hartford headquarters and campus. However, it's moving assembly of large commercial engines to North Carolina. So, you know, what is this recent transformation of Pratt Whitney meant for Connecticut? First of all, it means that our global success and the shift in workforce and manufacturing cost has enabled us to generate the margins and the earnings growth that allows us to make major investments right here in Connecticut. You know, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the two are really inexplicably linked. You know, the fact that we've had to make tough decisions here in Connecticut and restructure operations and have this shift in work has enabled us to have the profitability to reinvest in the business here in Connecticut. We've spent about $1 billion over the last 20 years to develop the geared turbofan technology that I talked about that really solidifies our position again as a global aerospace leader. Much of it being R&D and engineering investment money spent right here in Connecticut. In the past 7 years, we put about $150 million in capital into our Connecticut facilities. This same split, you see, at the same time, our global footprint is changing year by year as we position ourselves competitive. We now maintain facilities totaling about 12.5 million square feet. About 45% of it is here in Connecticut. You can see the same split with our workforce. About 46% of our employees work outside the United States now as we respond to customer needs, and that share is sure to continue to grow. You know, we expect that trend will continue, and more than half of Pratt's employees will be outside of the U.S. here. Of the remaining 54% that are not outside the U.S., about 30% of Pratt's population is here in Connecticut, and the rest in the remainder of the U.S. But while Connecticut-based workforce as a percent of total Pratt workforce has shrunk, the absolute total number of Connecticut employees has held relatively steady, about 12,000 employees over the past 15 years. Until the recent economic challenge we had in the last couple of years, we had to shrink a bit to deal with the economic crisis down to about 10,500. But we're actually growing again. We're adding engineers to deal with all this new business that we've won to develop the engines. We're adding hundreds of engineers right now in Connecticut. So we're increasing again, and it's worth mentioning that if you take a look at UTC's population in Connecticut, the 26,000 employees that they have in Connecticut, and they continue to be Connecticut's largest employer, has been stable for over about the same period of time. So the important thing to note here is that the hard decisions that we've made over the years to lean out our enterprise, to invest in technology, to expand our footprint into emerging markets and focus our work in Connecticut here on high-value, high-knowledge work has enabled Pratt Whitney to grow the overall business and maintain a stable workforce here in Connecticut. Yeah, the profile of the people in Connecticut has changed a bit, and unfortunately that's what often gets the headlines here in the Hartford Courant, as we've shifted our focus more toward high-value, high-skilled jobs that are right for Connecticut, the type of jobs that make sense for this state. In 1995, only about 48% of Connecticut-based workforce was salary, so less than half. But today, about 67%, or about 2 out of every 3 employees, is a salaried employee. So we've grown that percentage of salaried employees here. 15 years ago, only 20% of our employees here in Connecticut were engineers. Today, so 1 in 5. Today, that number is 1 in every 3. So we've grown the percentage of engineers that we have in the state of Connecticut. These are highly skilled employees, engineers, technicians, attorneys, financial managers, the whole support structure that you need to grow a global business, with pay averaging about $95,000 a year for these types of high-skilled employees. Our highly skilled hourly employees in the state don't just turn bolts. They concentrate on the most high complexity, sophisticated work that we do, high technology manufacturing, things like applying low observable coatings to engine parts that will go on the F-22 aircraft that will make that airplane almost invisible to radar, or manufacturing engine turbine blades that have to stay on wing for more than 10 years under extreme pressures with temperatures on the order of about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Our union machinists make about $90,000 a year. And with the Joint Strike Fighter engine coming into production and the Geared Turbofan family of engines behind it, the outlook for highly skilled, knowledge-based Connecticut operations can be excellent in the right business environment. The presence of these jobs and our company in Connecticut is also very beneficial, obviously, to the state as a whole. Our work creates jobs throughout the supply chain, and many of our suppliers are here today, where we order goods and service from close to 600 suppliers throughout the state of Connecticut, supporting thousands of jobs. And I'm sure that, as I'm sure you're all aware, we're an important element of the tax base. The precise figure, it can be arrived at in various ways, but it's safe to say that UTC pays tens of millions of dollars a year in corporate taxes to the Connecticut. They include income, sales tax, payroll, and property taxes. It doesn't include many of the millions of income and sales tax paid by UTC's 26,000 employees that I talked about in the state of Connecticut. So the difficult decision we made to close and restructure operations has actually, again, helped us maintain stability here in Connecticut. The difficult decision we made to close the engine overhaul operation in Cheshire and the small parts repair operation in East Hartford are the result of these kinds of changes in the competitive global landscape that I've been talking about. It really highlights what I've said about changing the 21st century business environment and the need for transformation. Transformation at Pratt Whitney and transformation for the state of Connecticut. It underscores the need to focus on doing the right work here in Connecticut. And the actions surrounding the decisions to close Cheshire and the small engine repair operation were tough. They generated a lot of heat, a lot of headlines in the current and legal fees for us. But I think they, quite honestly, shed some light on the challenges we faced. Now, in the case of the Cheshire Engine Center, the business volume was declining because a number of customers were taking their overhaul work back into their own shops. For example, with the merger last year of Northwest Airlines and Delta Airlines, Northwest used to send their engines for overhaul to Cheshire. Delta likes to repair their own engines, so when they combined all that engine work that Northwest was sending us went to the Delta shops. They wanted to bring it back in-house. Similarly, some of the military engine overhaul work, the government has decided they want to set up operations to do some of that work themselves in-house in Oklahoma, and so that we're doing that. So we had a significant decline in volume there, and we needed to take action. And if you look at the remaining work in the Cheshire Engine Center, the work that was going to remain there, much of it goes to Asia, where is one of the highest growth areas in the world. 20 years ago, China represented just 1% of the world air travel, as compared in the US at the time was about 40%. So 1% to 40% in the US. Today, that number is about 7.7% for China, and the US has now dropped from 41% of the world share to 25%. By 1920, projections are that China will nearly triple its air travel and air traffic, and they'll represent about 12% of the world, as compared to the US will only be 21%. So they went from 1/40th of the US to about half of the US 10 years from now. Also, our costs here in Connecticut were not competitive. Aerospace is a global business, and there are other operations in much lower cost areas, not only in the US, but around the world, run by our competitors that can easily do the work that we do in Cheshire, and it means that we either have to take action or lose the business altogether. Customers demanding competitive prices were voting with their business. We had our facility in Cheshire. We have a similar lower cost, much lower cost facility in Georgia. Both had excess capacity, so we had to consolidate the remaining work to be able to, again, maintain the business. These were not easy decisions. These are the employees in Cheshire were very good people doing very good work, and the same for the people in East Hartford in the small engine repair, the small parts repair operation. But it was no longer viable in the 21st century business environment to do that kind of work, the high labor content kind of work like that in Connecticut. However, because we're growing our footprint in the overall business and we had the flexibility, we were able to lessen the hurt. We could offer the people a very generous retirement package with a settlement we had with the union late last year, and we've got chances now to transfer some of the people that would be affected to the growth that we're seeing in our operations in East Hartford with some of the ramp up there and the ramp up in Middletown because of all the new engine development work that we've got there. So again, Connecticut is a good place to do the right kind of work, but there are issues that it needs to address to keep it that way. Just as those of us in the business sector must always be sensitive to competition, so must the state of Connecticut. First, we understand that Connecticut will never be a low-cost place to do business. Our location in the Northeast, housing cost, the general cost of living, the lack of cheap energy for us here. However, the state makes itself attractive enough as a competitive advantage to business. There are things that we can do to offset some of those factors, and the urgency of the state's financial crisis ought to be more than enough incentive to start transforming the state. And as Joe talked about, I think the attitude change is the first step. Even our state government's own studies have said repeatedly that Connecticut is perceived as an unfriendly place to do business. We have to move from a sometimes adversarial relationship to a more supportive one. The first instinct of some in the state government has been to file lawsuits against companies making tough decisions but necessary decisions to ensure global competitiveness. Now, not only does this discourage companies in Connecticut from expanding operations here, but it discourages other non-Connecticut companies from even considering moving operations here into the state. It's those very companies, however, whose growth will generate the wealth to solve some of the problems the new governor and the General Assembly face right now. There are innumerable studies about the competitiveness of Connecticut, and I won't go into a long recitation, but here are just a few examples of some of the studies that were done. We were dead last in job creation with zero job growth for the last 7 years in the United States. CNBC's study of the best states for business ranks us 47th in business costs and 23rd in business friendliness. Moody's says that we have the 6th highest state cost of doing business. Forbes ranks us 35th in competitiveness, the state of Connecticut. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a number of major aerospace companies have moved significant manufacturing operations to other states who have offered competitive advantages. And as we've seen during the past couple of decades, automotive manufacturers have taken similar actions, but both sectors have proven that manufacturing in the right locations can prove highly successful in the United States. I recommend that the leaders of the state of Connecticut consider benchmarking states like Virginia and South Carolina that have had a consistent track record of attracting businesses to see that what we can apply here in the state of Connecticut. Certainly one of the issues posing challenges here is also taxes, as business leaders who have had to make tough calls to deal with difficult fiscal realities, both at Pratt and also in my tenure at Hamilton Sundstrom. I'm sympathetic to the challenges that the leaders of our state face. You know, given the $3 billion plus deficit that we face right now that could potentially grow, it seems inevitable that we're going to face some tough combination of tax hikes and spending cuts. I really don't envy the governor and the men and the women of the legislature with the decisions that they have to face right now, but I do have some suggestions on how they might approach them to, again, help create a climate that generates job growth and prosperity that will help us out of the current financial crisis. First, the Connecticut's tax structure has to be stable and predictable. Debating major tax changes every year creates uncertainty, and as you know, uncertainty kills investment for all of us. As an illustration, in Pratt Whitney's case, we make long-term business decisions because of the life cycle of our product. The work, for example, on our F-135 engine that goes on the Joint Strike Fighter, we started that development work in the 1980s. We delivered the first production engine last year. Geared turbofan, we've been working on technology and investing $1 billion or so over the last 20 years to mature that concept and that technology. We're actually in development now for the real engine applications. They won't go into production until 2013, and then they'll be in production for decades to come. So these are long cycle businesses, and you have a long horizon business decision. We have to have some predictability in our tax burden we face to make the decisions where to locate R&D and manufacturing work. The stability and predictability of taxes is just as important as the actual tax rate. Unfortunately, that's not always been the case here in Connecticut. In the early 1990s, for example, we decided to move our military engine business from Florida up here to Connecticut, about 1,200 jobs. These were high-paying, mostly engineering jobs. And part of what influenced to do that was the R&D tax credit. But within a few years, the state changed the rules. The credit can no longer be applied to the R&D, only to 70% of the R&D. So it was a 30% hit on our multi-million-dollar investment long-term R&D program that we had already committed to. Another example is the sales tax exemption on many manufacturing activities. Every so often, people propose eliminating the exemption. Hasn't happened yet, but the discussion creates uncertainty that can be a true disincentive to investing here in Connecticut. And I can tell you that if the exemption were eliminated, it would make Connecticut operations untenable. And there are those who say that the corporate income tax rate here ought to be increased, but business pays a lot of taxes already. You all know that, I don't have to tell you that. Connecticut ranks 18th in the corporate tax burden among the 50 states. And taxes on personal income and unemployment insurance were also higher than in many states. You stack up all those factors, and that with a very high property tax, as well as real estate and asset taxes on business, and you're guaranteed a very poor climate for Connecticut businesses. The Tax Foundation's State Business Tax Climate Index ranks Connecticut 47th, fourth worst among 50 states. About half the total sales tax revenue the states get comes from the businesses. Between 30 and 40% of property taxes are paid by companies. And the income taxes, sales taxes, and fees we all pay comes from the paychecks that our companies all generate. And by the way, UTC, as I said, is still the largest employer in the state of Connecticut with a payroll of about $2 billion a year. So I'd ask the governor and the legislator to look at a tax policy this way. Tax us on our success, not just on our ability to achieve that success. And set up a stable tax structure that encourages growth, and the state will be able to gain taxes from the fruits of our company's growth. Support businesses that employ people here in Connecticut and make products that are exported from the state but return wealth back to the state of Connecticut. Our economic future will come from areas such as high-precision manufacturing, aerospace, biotech, and financial services. Now, I must say that one thing that attracts Pratt Whitney to places like Singapore, China, Turkey, and Poland, where we have big populations, is the long-term commitment of the local governments to economic growth. They stick by the promises they make, and as a result, we now have more than 8,000 employees doing overhaul and repair work and manufacturing in those 4 countries. Much of the same can be said of the state of Georgia, too, right here in the United States, where we began our operations in Georgia in the 1980s. Georgia, by the way, ranks near the middle of the pack as far as the corporate tax burden, but its cost of doing business is far lower than the state of Connecticut in terms of real estate, energy costs, and average employee wages down there. Now, another area that I think bears looking at is regulation. The legislature's Program Review Committee reports on competitiveness stress that we need to streamline interagency approach to regulation. We need predictability in regulation just like we need predictability in taxes. When Pratt Whitney makes a decision on a new piece of equipment or a new process, we need to know that a multi-million-dollar investment won't be regulated out within a couple of years. Perhaps major regulatory changes could be phased in so business will have time to plan for investments needed. And Yes, it's very important to the state of Connecticut to be a green state, but we must know the costs and the benefits of that kind of regulation. And the regulatory process should be easier and faster. According to the Center for Digital Government, we rank 37th in the United States in electronic services for business. The legislature's own studies on competitiveness points out that technology is able to create a single website where a business or an individual can go and get all the necessary plans, approvals, inspections, and certificates for a capital project or an expansion project. Trying to comply with all that here in the state of Connecticut is not always clear or easy. A few years back, for example, we were trying to do the right thing. Pratt was trying to do the right thing in East Hartford. We were remediating an environmental issue that we had to. Our plans had to be reviewed by the Army Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, the federal EPA, the state DEP, and the town of East Hartford. It's encouraging to hear that last summer the DEP began working to adopt lean process techniques to speed up and better coordinate the review and decision making of 25 permit programs that it administers. Streamlining regulatory processes and getting agencies to coordinate and avoid duplication should be a top priority for the new administration. And who knows, we might save a few dollars for the state and all that. And we'll all due respect to Jeff Butler at CL&P, and I know Jeff, and we've met on occasion and shared stories of different challenges we have working in the state here. So they have their own set of challenges, and I don't mean to pile on, but Connecticut has the second highest electricity cost in the nation, right here in Connecticut. In fact, electricity costs are so high that we made a business case and a decision a number of years ago to establish our own generating capability in Middletown. We're probably not going to discover oil or gas on Avon Mountain, but maybe there's some other things that we can do for the state. In the debate about deregulation or regulation, we believe that a deregulated competitive wholesale market for electricity is in Connecticut's best interest over the long run. About 30% of Connecticut's electricity comes from natural gas. We need to develop more natural gas infrastructure to make sure that the resource is available to Connecticut. Large discoveries of shale gas and the ability to deliver that gas to New England can help us control our costs. Even with the importance of natural gas, we can diversify. A mix of oil, gas, nuclear, clean coal, wind, solar, and hydropower give us the option to assure a very robust system for delivering power in the future demand. We need to improve our electricity transmission system and delivery infrastructure. Access to low-cost generation capacity outside Connecticut can control costs and improve the reliability of the power grid. We should not use electric bills as a backdoor tax collection device. In the years past, the conservation fund surcharge on electric bills has been diverted from conservation into the general fund in Connecticut. The competitive transition assessment, another tax, was enacted to cover the cost of moving to a more competitive electric market. Instead, they took the assessment and they've used it to pay for bonds to help to reduce the state deficit. We're blessed in Connecticut with great public and private colleges and universities, and we have a highly educated workforce here. But our workforce is aging, and a lot of young people are leaving the state for colleges and never coming back. We need to find ways to make education more affordable here in Connecticut and help to create jobs that will keep our next generation here. We're proud of the UTC Employee Scholar Program, which we began at UTC over 15 years ago. So far, at Pratt Whitney alone, we have invested about $322 million on our people through the Employee Scholar Program. And employees have earned over close to 11,000 degrees, academic degrees. And in all of UTC, the program spent in excess close to $1 billion on tuition, books, and fees, and other materials, and stock awards to the employees who graduate. And UTC employees have earned close to 31,000 degrees at accredited colleges and universities. So UTC is walking the walk. We continue to believe that enhancing higher education is one of the surest ways of spurring economic development here in the state of Connecticut and keep us competitive with other states in the U.S. and keep us competitive in the world. Healthcare costs are a national issue. We can find ways to control them. Right now we have the 5th highest health insurance premiums in the country. according to the Kaiser Foundation study. Our employee contributions to premiums are the 4th highest in the country. You know, now I think we can all agree there's a lot to like about Connecticut. We have a highly educated and skilled workforce, as I've talked about. As Joe pointed out, our proximity to New York and Washington and Boston is a plus, despite the traffic sometime. We have a great quality of life here. We have easy access to the beautiful mountains and the ocean. And as a Constitution state, we have a great history here that really enables us to generate some tourism dollars here in the state of Connecticut. And as I've said, we have some of the best colleges and universities in the world right here in the state of Connecticut. And all of you are here today because you want to find ways to grow your businesses and stay here in Connecticut. But Connecticut's got some tough issues, but I sense a new attitude about tackling them, including the promise of an enlightened leadership from Governor Malloy, who you're going to hear from later this morning, who has already reached out to the business community in a big way. I mean, before his inauguration, after the election, before the end of last year, he was already establishing meetings with the business community, including the chairman of UTC now, Mr. Louis Chinevere, that he met with late last year. I think the fact that he did that and the fact that he's here this morning to speak to you says everything about his attitude toward business in the state of Connecticut. We need to work in partnership with the governor and the state to make sure Connecticut becomes the competitive state that it can be. We need to be in a dialogue with representatives in Congress, and then we need to make Connecticut businesses even more competitive. You know, now with basketball season underway, I'm reminded that we know a little bit about being competitive here in Connecticut, and I think any UConn Husky fan can probably tell you that or talk about that. And Jim Calhoun and Gino Oriana certainly have demonstrated year after year, if you create conditions for success and cultivate great talent, there's really no limit to what you can achieve. And I think the same thing applies here. If we have to have a real collaboration between government, business, and education here. There's more than enough brainpower in the state of Connecticut to set big goals and achieve big results, but Connecticut cannot win by sticking with business as usual. As Governor Malloy has already stated, Connecticut must be open to business. The state budget crisis tells us business as usual is not working. We all have seen plan after plan, year after year. Now we must act to transform ourselves, the state of Connecticut, to be competitive with the 21st century global economy. We want to be the best educated, smartest people doing the best work in the world, creating prosperity and security for the future of the state. Business goes where it can be successful. That's why Frederick Rensselaer, the founder of Pratt Whitney, came from New Jersey to Hartford, Connecticut in 1925 to found Pratt Whitney. Globalization means companies have options. For Connecticut to compete and win, the state must transform itself and find ways to become a competitive advantage for business. And I'm confident the state can partner with business to be successful in the global race, but a race has to be run to win. Every day we stand still, we fall behind. There's no reason why Connecticut can't continue our long-standing heritage of being a world leader based on skilled work, productivity, and technology innovation. If we could commit to these things, we can no doubt together we can win in terms of both prosperity for the state and prosperity for the businesses here, all of you. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks, but I think I've got a few minutes for Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.